of Ethex and Energize Africa, two of the leading positive investment platforms in the UK. We're going to be having a great discussion today with some of our sector experts and people who are building real life projects at the moment and raising finance. We're going to be covering quite a lot of ground, and we have a number of really great panelists with me today. So I will shortly get going and ask them to introduce themselves. Just to say, as ever, this isn't a promotion specifically to invest, and please don't take this as any kind of financial advice. If you do need any more information in relation to the topics that we're talking about today, please do go to our website, or we will try and send some useful links after the session if there are particular questions that we can't address during the time today. So we have about 45 minutes planned for the session, but we can run to an hour. And all of the participants who have signed up will be able to submit questions via the chat function. And I will try and feed these in to our discussion as we go, or if I can't address them all, we'll have a quick fire Q&A towards the end as well. So let me just first quickly run through who I've got joining me today, and then I'll ask them in this order, I think, to just do a quick 2-minute introduction. And then we're going to talk about the problem of homelessness in the UK, what some of the solutions are specifically around ones which are rooted in community action, the types of funding that are available to these projects, which should be interesting from an investor point of view, looking at how the whole financing piece comes together with any community shares, excuse me, or community bonds, and also from a project point of view, looking at building new projects, knowing who's out there and what's available, and then really summing up by our vision at the end and how people can get involved. So firstly, just to say then, welcoming Anna Helene from CAF Venturesome. If you could all give us a little wave, and then I'll run through everybody and you can come back and introduce yourselves. Then we've got John Lee from Helen Collin, Ground Against Homelessness, Helen Bartlett, Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust, Daniel Brewer, Mustard Seed Property, also from Resonance, and Steve Howell from Somerset Cooperative CLT. So lots of people with us today. I hope it will be a fruitful discussion. And Helen, if you want to kick off and just give a brief introduction, that would be
sure.
great.
Thank you, Lisa. So hi, I'm Helen from CAF Venturesome. So we are one of the pioneer social investor in the UK. And I'm an investment manager for our community-led housing fund, which we've launched this year. So CAF Venturesome, we've been supported community-led housing schemes since 2008. We've made over 70 investments in over 40 community-led housing groups. And we've launched this new fund this year, which is open for the next 5 years, to provide really flexible and more affordable finance to communities looking to develop affordable homes. And we provide, as a result, loans primarily, but alongside grants in most cases as well. Thank you.
John, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everybody. My name's John Lee. I'm Business Development Manager at Ecology Building Society. Been here for about 14 years now. And as you can see, I'm also moonlighting as air traffic control in my spare time. But we do savings and mortgages, and a particular strand of that business that I'm involved in is community-led housing. We've always been supportive of mutual ownership, as we're a mutual ourselves, and we see that community-led schemes tend to be also very much predicated on sustainable design and development, low impact living, etc. So it very much fits in with our values and those of our members, our savers.
Okay, Helen, if you'd like to go next.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Helen Carlin, and I have recently established a new community benefit society called Common Ground Against Homelessness. That's born out of the sheer frustration of heading up a homelessness charity and finding it practically impossible in Edinburgh to find affordable accommodation.
Thanks, Helen. And Helen, the other Helen from Brighton and Hove.
Hi, thanks Lisa. I'm Helen Bartlett. I'm the hub organiser and investment coordinator for Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust. And we're a community land trust and community benefit society. We're a membership-based organisation, and our kind of overarching aim is to put housing benefit back in the hands of people who need it. So seeing our city as a place that has become inaccessible and inaffordable to live in for too many people who live here. And the way that we do that is we kind of support and enable community-led housing groups across the city to find their own solutions to shared housing needs. And our sort of long-term aim is to move land and property out of the market and into kind of in community hands in perpetuity.
Thank you, Helen. And Daniel.
Oh, hi, so Daniel Brewer. I'm Chief Exec of Resonance, which is an impact investment company that Lisa mentioned, but also a non-exec of Mustard Seed Property, which is the hat I'm wearing today. Mustard Seed Property is again a community-led organisation based in Cornwall, where I live, and it was set up 10 years ago to again address housing need, particularly for vulnerable adults in Cornwall. So working across homelessness, but also supporting organisations that work with people with learning disability and also victims of domestic violence, people recovering from drug and alcohol addictions. So we're an organisation that's a property company only. We lease to operational organisations that then support a number of different individuals across Cornwall.
Thank you, Daniel. Ben?
Hi, hi Lisa, hi everybody. Joining today, I work at Resonance. I work with Daniel, and I'm an advisor to Mustard Seed Property, who, as people I think know, we've got a share offer live on Ethex. And we're doing all right. It's at £310,000 currently, but we're looking to get a bit more in to help us, achieve our objectives of getting the second house developed and moving to the third and fourth properties over the next period of time.
Thanks, Ben. And Steve from Somerset Co-op CLT.
Hello, I'm Steve from Somerset Cooperative Community Land Trust. And Community Land Trust has been going 11 years, and in that time it's acquired 2 commercial properties and put flats above both of them. One of the commercial properties it lets to Somerset Cooperative Services and itself as a cooperative hub for social enterprises and co-ops. It's looking to develop the rear gardens, and the planning permission is due any day for 8 flats in the rear gardens of those 2 buildings. And it's also looking to, it's got an option agreement on a site in the market town called Wiveliscombe to develop over 20 units there for affordable accommodation again. They're all for rented affordable accommodation. And also to have a social enterprise hub there as well. So basically the aim of the Community Land Trust is to develop not only housing, but to put social enterprise hubs into all of its developments that it can. That's available to the residents, to help the residents, and also the social economy in those communities as well. And we have an offer live on Ethex at the moment. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you all. So in this time that we've had, mostly at home, we found that community has been a theme which is really strong and becoming stronger, even in the, I'm not sure if we can say we're out of COVID by any stretch of the imagination, but throughout the lockdown, certainly community has has become very important to us all, I think. And on the flip side as well, I think there's a growing number of people who have obviously found themselves in a situation of financial distress. Perhaps this was existing before the lockdown, perhaps it's something that's been exacerbated by it. But certainly trying to provide affordable housing which is rooted in our community is something that we all feel very strongly about on this call. So I'd like to just sort of like talk about why this is really important, and also what the challenges are that we're seeing at the moment in terms of the UK housing market, temporary housing and homelessness. So I'd like perhaps Helen, if you'd like to start the conversation, because you already mentioned that in Edinburgh there was a real crisis. Could you set the scene for us?
Yes, of course. Thanks. So pre-COVID we had around 200 people living in the streets of Edinburgh, and that's just Edinburgh. Locally, City of Edinburgh Council will spend £6 million a year in temporary accommodation for homeless people, often in B&Bs. Folk were taken off the streets and housed in 3 hotels, and bluntly put, we've already got 50 people back in the streets because it was not long-term or sustainable. So that's what we've got in Edinburgh, okay, where every property that would be suitable for our area of expertise, which is long-term supported accommodation with full tenancy rights, is a backpackers hostel.
Okay, and Anne-Hélène, why is it that CAF in particular has decided to focus its efforts in affordable housing as one of its key areas? What do you see the challenges are, and why that focus from you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've, as I said in my introduction, we've invested in the area since 2008. And I think CAF, to be honest, I was not there, so I can say that we're quite visionary in doing that, because there were 16 CLTs, I think, at the time when we set up the fund. And now there are over 150 community groups who are looking to build around between 10 and 20,000 affordable homes that they have in their pipeline. So it shows the appetite for community to try to fix basically market. You know, I mean, there's been some commission and research published by both cross-parties government who recognize that we need to build 150,000 homes per year over the next 20 years. And right now we're only building 6,000. So that just shows the scale of the gap that we need to address. And I think, I mean, I agree with Helen, homelessness, they're obviously the ones at the bottom of the line, so they're even more affected. But you kind of need to address affordable housing for also, you know, teachers, nurses, carers, police workers, who spend up till, it's ridiculous, 60 or 70% of their salary on private rented sector, and therefore can't afford anything. So for us, that's why it's been a huge issue. It's both that we've seen the challenge of the housing market, but also we're seeing the communities who are ready to address that gap, and they're doing really well to do so.
Okay, and if I could ask Helen Bartlett to come in there as well, because I know in Brighton and Hove as well, you've got some particular challenges in terms of the cost of housing in the context of the UK market in its entirety. Could you just outline the challenge specifically?
Absolutely. So in Brighton and Hove, we have, I think, the second highest house prices in the UK, and it's not reflected in average income. So what Anne-Hélène was saying, you know, average rents take up 68% of average income within Brighton. We have high homelessness populations, and we, during COVID, decided we wanted to reach out to our members, to the people we engage with, to find out their experiences of lockdown, you know, because it was the first time that kind of this massive thing had happened where people were kind of confined to their own homes. You know, their experience of it was directly linked to the places that they lived, and we really saw this tale of a kind of segregated city. So people who lived in houses that were suitable, that were the right size, that had outdoor space, they were doing okay. But for people who were in too expensive accommodation, who were renting, you know, who weren't in places that had size or had outdoor space, those were really impacting on their experiences and their kind of mental health. And so we were seeing renters who were so worried about their kind of financial security, people with families in like these small flats who were just like, we're not coping with this. And it's hitting all levels. It's hitting our, you know, it's hitting our key workers, so many kind of people within our city were impacted. So I think, and we want to look at, you know, we look at affordable, we think that's one of the key things, but we also want to look at, like, you know, we think everybody deserves home, a place that they can call home, that they can feel secure in, and that is suited to their needs. And we think as an organisation that we can kind of work towards achieving that. Yeah,
thank you. And I think talking about suitable housing, Daniel, perhaps you could just add into that, you know, the perspective from Mustard Seed in terms of suitable accommodation for people perhaps with more complex needs.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's been a journey over the last decade, really, where particularly people with learning disabilities have traditionally been housed in really a kind of hospital type setting, quite institutional settings. And then there was a big shift, and continues to be a big shift, away from that and care homes into shared housing. But when you have people who have autism living intensely together, actually it's quite complex if you put too many people in the same space. So then there was a shift to try and say, well, everyone should have their own flat. And so people with learning disabilities were being put into their own flat, and that sounded great. But then they were really isolated and weren't able to easily socialize with their neighbors. And actually, all of the above are okay for some people. They are the appropriate solution. But the model that we've been trying to push for is a bit closer to co-living, really. Almost the model that we see is a sort of mini version of the retirement flats that are built. So everyone has their own private accommodation, but it's part of a development where there also is built into the actual building space for support to be delivered, for socializing to happen. And we've not seen it done very well. Most people are trying to cram as many units of accommodation in as possible. And actually what we've got is some pretty small, in some cases really micro units, but it comes with an entitlement to use other bits of the building. But there are actually only six in the property that we're developing at the moment. There are only 6 units in there. So it's a hybrid between these two housing models that are much more traditional. It's not a shared house. It's not an independent flat. It's a co-living scenario, but for people who need to understand each other and benefit from and thrive from that interaction, and okay, frankly, it's economically more able to support them because you have one support worker to support 6 residents.
Thank you. So we're starting to already talk about solutions. So I think we've set the context in terms of what the challenges are. Just before we move on to those solutions, somebody's asked, what's the difference between affordable housing and social housing? Perhaps John, would that be, or Anne-Helene, would you like to just address that?
Yeah, I can certainly help on that. I mean, we have a variety of projects coming across our desks, some of which are based on a social rent model, which is set at a rent that is approved within the local authority that we're dealing with. There is also the government's classification of affordable housing as a percentage of open market rental value. That doesn't necessarily chime with it being affordable, which is the problem. And really the way that we assess any case is to look at not only the statutory guidance as to what affordability is, but to take a look at the reality of the situation. And actually, it's only affordable if you've got demand that can be looked after without overstretching themselves, and have their rents not getting into the sort of figures that Helen was talking about as a percentage of your net income. Because if that is the case, and if interest rates and inflation goes up, we have to stress test for those possibilities as well. We can't assume that that the affordable rental income will keep pace with the cost of finance and the cost of living. So, long-winded answer, but we tend to take quite a bespoke view on a project-by-project basis when we're assessing what rent is truly affordable for the group that we're lending to and its members or tenants.
And Helen, would you like to just add
Yeah.
on?
I mean, I echo what John has said. I think there is a really good research which has been published recently by Lord Best, a commission on affordable housing and what it represents. And indeed trying to move away from the government's 80% open market value to moving to linking to the average income. So the kind of 30% acceptable, shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on your accommodation. That's what we're looking at. And obviously we need to look at affordability for the local community. So us, like John Weir says, scheme by scheme, what is affordable for this specific community? Because even if it appears affordable across national standard, it might not be for that specific local community. So we look at that.
Yeah, great. Okay, so let's look at some specific case studies then. So in the context of solutions, we've got community land trusts, social enterprises, community benefit societies that all have an end goal of rebuilding communities by providing permanently affordable and suitable homes, and with the hashtag sort of affordable forever. So yes, could I invite Steve to just talk about what's happening in Somerset and how why you've chosen the model that you have, and what's been your experience so far?
The model, well, I'll first talk about affordability really, because we have a rule of thumb affordability that local authorities work with, which is around 80% of the private rental rate. Now that's obviously not, can be quite high for some people, I accept that. But we do actually do quite a lot of work to make sure that it's affordable also for young people, those of people who are 26 and under, who don't get the full housing allowance. They get what's known as a lower housing allowance, and that does not cover anywhere in the private market a self-contained accommodation. And we actually struggle to meet that as well, and we do it by providing other services such as reduced rate or free internet services and other services to them that helps their affordability and is also payable alongside their universal credit as part of their universal credit as well. So we do quite a lot of work to make sure our accommodation is as affordable as possible for all ages. In terms of our model, we're very interested really in working with communities and our residents to make sure that their social economy thrives as well. So this means that there's job opportunities for our residents as well as the local community. So we make sure where we can with all developments, there's going to be some sort of social enterprise hub facility, some sort of building, and that is managed by Somerset Corporate Services, who work very closely with the Community Land Trust. Was there any more detail on that?
Well, so tell us about the project that's being developed at the moment, or soon to be developed.
The one at East Reach already has a social enterprise hub there, which is where we're based, Somerset Co-op Services and the Community Land Trust. And that's been going now for over 10 years and has helped an awful lot of co-ops to set up, and indeed has found jobs for the Community Land Trust tenants. In fact, one of my ex-colleagues 3 years ago was somebody who was about to be thrown out of accommodation for all sorts of reasons, got into financial difficulties, and as of this year had progressed to be a development worker, helping many co-ops to set up, and is about to move on to a master's degree. So that's quite a success. So the present development of 8 flats, which is going to be in the rear gardens, will be for single people. And we're also going to enlarge the offices and enterprise hub, so there's more meeting rooms available for the residents, and that we can serve more startup co-ops and support those that are already up and running.
Thanks very much. And Helen B, if you could just tell us what's happening in Brighton at the moment, and what projects are being developed.
So in Brighton and Hove CLT, we both develop projects ourselves, and we support and enable groups to run their own projects. So our aim through that is to really respond to communities identifying their own needs and developing their own solutions and being able to mobilize kind of wider community resources. So we have a really wide range of projects, from groups that are building high quality eco homes for low income households. We work with a group that is trying to, in a similar way to Mustard Seed, provide suitable accommodation for young adults that have an autistic spectrum condition. We work with a group who are an LGBTQ plus group, who are developing shared housing for key workers. So there's quite specific localized context, again responding to shared needs within groups. We've got a share offer on the Ethex platform at the moment, which is trying to buy our first property, and that one is interesting. We're working with a group of young people, of students, called Sea Salt Housing Cooperative, and that's interesting because students are often, within the Brighton and Hove context, seen as one of the most privileged within the market. Purpose-built student accommodation is going up all over the place. There's kind of competition for family homes, and that's interesting because actually, as young people, students are one of the most likely to face unaffordable rents, poor conditions in the housing, just by virtue of them being young people, and kind of exploitative landlords. And that project is very, very interesting because what Sea Salt and the CLT together as a group are trying to do is to say, this is a problem for this group, but it also puts pressure on existing communities, the conversion of big houses into houses of multiple occupancy that can be let for high amounts to students, taking away kind of and so what we do, we're exploring alternatives provided by, closure of old guest houses. We're trying to look for alternatives that both work with that group of young people who are experiencing these problems, but also to kind of take away pressure that it's causing in other communities. So we see it as a kind of multi-layered approach that both needs to respond to very local context of kind of groups and communities, but also how that impacts across our whole city.
Great, thank you. And if I could ask Daniel to just give an overview of what the model is. You've already introduced it slightly.
Yes, sorry, I went on to solutions too quickly, didn't I? I mean, part of the model, I've talked a bit about the property model, and we're trying to customize for the particular groups of people that our partner charities are supporting. But I thought it's worth saying that actually part of our model is about releasing capital to these social enterprise partners that we have, that they wouldn't be able to get in other ways. So there tend to be relatively small, sort of sub £1 million turnover charity social enterprises that are really focused on delivering support on the ground. and some of them do own properties directly, but there is a limit to the amount of money that they can borrow. Their balance sheets are just not strong enough for them to just raise more money. And so what we have is a leasing model where we can use the equity that we raise from individuals, and we've got 200 individuals so far that have invested, which has just been amazing, from all over the country, not just from Cornwall, and that has enabled us to then borrow money from ethical lenders, like the Great Ecology Building Society, which we truly hope we will do some business with you guys in due course, to then buy properties that can be leased. And the leases that we structure are flexible. We constantly look at ways that we can invest in the properties to make them better quality for the individuals, but also improve the energy efficiency. So we've got some solar panels on some, where we're generating a return to our investors, but giving the free electricity to the tenants, which makes the charities that are renting it stronger, and actually looking to create a better quality of life. So we have standard things like mechanical ventilation heat recovery, which is just a sensible thing to do to improve air quality in the property. But fundamentally, we're looking at not only providing accommodation that's good for vulnerable people so that they can really flourish in and live their life to the full, rather than just be sectioned off to a bit of society that's forgotten, but also make the social enterprises and charities that we lease to stronger so that they have more income and they have better quality provision, and that positions them well for them.
Thank you. And Helen Carlin, so you've described your model and what your objectives are. Perhaps as we start to move into, talking about funding, tell us about the challenges that you've faced in terms of funding and starting your project, and then we'll move into talking more generally about funding. And I'd like John to come in and start talking about how ecology's worked with affordable housing over the years.
Okay, well, thanks. I mean, we basically pinched the mustard seed model. And so I'm very grateful to Daniel for all the hard work that he's been putting in over the years to make it easier for us. So our share offer will be, we hope, 100% community benefit society share.
Okay.
And yeah, shouldn't be a problem. But we will, Rowan Alba will provide this, it's very much the mustard seed model, and Rowan Alba will provide the support. So we're aiming to replicate a service that we've run for 15 years. And I absolutely agree with Daniel on the difficulties of a company like Rowan Alba getting the sort of money that's required to get these things off the ground, hence the community benefit society model.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So John, if you'd like to sort of set the context in terms of how you work with these organisations, and then Helen, if you can talk about your housing fund as well, and we can talk about how that sort of dovetails together with, the mortgage provider plus the community shares and what the whole overall picture looks like.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lisa. I think a couple of things to kick off with. The first, and I think important thing that we decided to do as a society was to have a bespoke community business development team within the organisation, because I think it is an area that, whilst every project has its own nuanced differences around different types of community-led housing, there are some common areas that you need to assess, but having a dialogue with groups around the country with different structures, different ideas, whether it's new build, retrofit, bringing empty homes back into use for people with acute housing need, that sort of thing. It helps if you're talking to people who don't look at you like you've got three heads, basically. There is a different sort of approach needed than perhaps a standard approach to property lettings and finance. And that is not just about getting the right balance between affordability for end users and being able to repay mortgage finance to the likes of Ecology Building Society, but also looking at the long-term impact on the local community and on the environment. And I think, you know, the really positive thing to say that we've learned over sort of 40 years of being in business and doing some form of community-led housing over all of that time is that as an investment, it's proved to be a pretty safe, secure place to be. That most of the projects we get involved in tend to stick around and get passed on from one generation to another. So, you know, I think from those sort of early beginnings when we were doing the odd mortgage for housing co-ops back in the early 80s, we've learned a lot, certainly in the last few years, as community land trusts and co-housing and even mutual home ownership societies and other groups that are involved in self-help housing, in other words, getting empty homes back into use, in learning about the different nuances of those quite different projects within that umbrella of community-led. And having products and an approach that's consistent with that. I suppose what I mean by that is reasonable prices on interest rates that reflect the relatively low risk of the long-term loans that we're doing, providing funding over a good length of time, because, you know, getting 20% deposit on a property with values as they are now in places like Brighton and London and elsewhere is hard enough. Then having to pay a mortgage back over 20-25 years is impossible if you're having to borrow the rest at commercial rates, even if they're reasonable rates. So we are really taking that in a couple of directions. One is to make our mortgages available for community-led groups over a period of up to 40 years, which sounds like a very long time, is a very long time, but actually we're lending to organisations that don't physically age. Their members tend to, but they tend to replenish and regenerate. So there's a rationale for that. But also, as well as the longevity of the loans, I think it's about providing capital at the right times in the right way, and that's providing interest-only capital when projects are in the development or renovation phase, and then being able to move their capital onto a longer-term repayment model once the properties are fully let and occupied, and we can see that there's a safe and reliable income to do that with. And I would just add, that is the other strand to that is working with other providers that can help at different points in the process. We're not the answer to everybody's prayers. We can't lend where there's no planning consent and things like that. And there may be projects that are a little bit too difficult for us to do just on our own, or too big to do on our own. So it's working with other providers like the organisations that Anne-Helene and Daniel represent, to put together packages alongside them, and also working with the umbrella bodies such as the Brighton and Hove Hub that Helen's involved with, that are advising groups on a regional or local basis to be able to get expertise on how to put their business plans together to make them investment ready. So it's very much a sort of joined up picture that needs to happen, and there's an awful lot been done over the last 2 or 3 years by the sector itself to make that more and more accessible. What we'd actually like to see is more lenders getting involved and trying to get the message across that it's actually a sector that's on the up.
Great, thank you. Good, that leads segue straight in, Anne-Helene, I think, to talk to you, and then perhaps Ben, you could give Resonance's point of view as well, you know, in terms of how it all makes up the sort of finance matrix. If I could ask you to be fairly brief, because there's also some questions that I'd like to get to as well, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Sounds good. So yeah, just to follow up on what John has said. So we've published last year a report called Helping Communities Build, where we shared basically our learning of invested over 10 years in the sector. So hopefully that can be interesting for the members as well, and sharing John's concern about having more lenders involved in the sector. Absolutely, we want to work towards that as well. So in terms of funding, it's quite a patchy funding landscape for community-led housing, especially as we await what's going to happen with the Community Housing Fund, so the government big funding program. But having said that, I'm always impressed how community housing groups manage to tap into multiple pots to kind of make it work, and obviously we help as well them to do that. So you actually are likely to need community shares as well as, you know, a mortgage from Ecology, as well as potentially a loan from us, whether it's a kind of a bridging loan till the community shares funding you can access, for instance, or whether, as John said, it is a mortgage, but then it's some junior lending, so someone behind a bank to kind of, again, fill the gap. So we launched our CLH fund, we very much look at all the offer out there and what the gaps were, and we're trying to fill these exact gaps. So in terms of overall funding, there's a website which is really useful called Community-Led Home Partnership. If you Google that and if you look at get funding, you have a list literally of a lot of funding at every stage of where you are in your project. So whether you're at group stage or you're just forming, or whether you find a site but you don't have planning yet, or whether you have all this, but then you need to look for development finance. So it's very helpful. And I would say there are lots of grant funding at the, a little, at national level. So organizations like Power to Change or nationwide foundations, for instance, are offering, but also at the local level. So local authorities, community foundations are worth tapping into. And then you can come and speak to us, basically, where we offer, again, loan alongside grants. So previously we're just doing loan, but now we're able, through a partnership with Power to Change, to also offer grants. And we can come as a pre-planning permission. So we take a lot of risk as a lender to come before planning. And then we can help you get there till basically you're ready for development. And when Ecology or another social bank will be able to kind of take the big share of the lending, if you'd like.
Perfect, thank you. And Ben, just very briefly, just tell us your perspective.
Yeah, I agree with Anne, Helene and everyone else. It's about the right forms of capital at the right time. Community shares are crucial. Give people participation, obviously, in the society. They can join in, help run them, and providing properties for the people that need them. It helps you then unlock debt from social lenders like Ecology and Triodos and everybody else. Very briefly, I saw a question come up about bonds. That could also be an exciting part of the mix, and something we know you're very interested in at Ethex and that we want to do at Resonance, helping charities potentially issue their own debt, allowing community investors to also capital and those sort of fixed returns over a few years. So it's the right sorts of capital at the right time. And very briefly, if I may, Lisa, at Resonance, we're also building a fund at the moment. We're investing and supporting community enterprises from the very earliest stages, where it is that bit more difficult to get share capital in initially, helping them buy land, get to planning permission and so on, when they can then look to unlock those other forms of capital that we know are out there.
Thank you. And I'm not sure whether everyone can see the questions coming in, but we have various comments, stating that it's very hard for lenders to lend without planning permission. So I think Anne-Helene has already highlighted that there are organisations out there which will get involved at the development phase and are prepared to take risks. But I think someone's suggesting also some lobbying, which is we also obviously encourage as well, and we can talk a little bit more about that perhaps in our follow-up email. And yes, obviously, just to say as well, community shares is a really important piece of the puzzle because it's such patient capital. But we do recognise that not everyone can tie their money up for a very long period of time. So agreed, bonds also play an important part, and I hope we'll see, a mix and a blend of community bonds and community shares start to come onto the platform. We've certainly seen a huge increase in community-led housing come into our pipeline over the last 2 years or so. and that's really encouraging, because community energy traditionally has been, you know, one of the areas that a lot of our investors are comfortable with, and they invest regularly and repeatedly. And I very much hope that community-led housing is going to follow on from that and become something which is really taken to heart and is seen as a interesting investment, positive investment opportunity. So, and obviously, of course, I should just point out that, yes, there are other providers available, and someone's very rightly pointed out Charity Bank and Triodos also doing very good work as well. So thank you for that. So let's have a look at some of these questions. I think there was an interesting point or question around sort of intergenerational living and that as a potential solution as well. Is there anyone who'd like to talk to that? Have you any experience?
I can comment to some degree. I think we're starting to see quite an interesting pattern with some of the groups that are applying for funding at the moment, looking at a mutual home ownership model, for example, where you've got part rent, part debt contribution towards the asset, and having an equity stake in the project. And that the designs behind that, the most well-known project is probably Lilac in Leeds that's currently up and running. But the idea is that you can attract a range of people, both from perhaps the older generation who have savings to put into the project that contribute towards buying the asset, but also making it available to people who have less equity to put in, who will pay a higher proportion of their contribution in rent. And that encourages a sort of multi-generational mix in terms of the membership of that organisation. We're still getting our heads around some of that at the moment. It's a slightly more complicated model than a simple co-op or a simple co-housing scheme, but there really are some interesting possibilities with that. And we're also seeing groups forming deliberately senior groups as well, sort of 50 plus members, where the desire really is to have somewhere where there is a mutual approach to social care and healthcare, even in later life, rather than, you know, the alternatives of state care homes and or loneliness and isolation. So I think there's a lot of interesting ideas coming out of this, and I think Daniel was saying earlier that you know, the sort of social benefits of the sort of co-living project are quite substantial, and sometimes across a wider range of social groups than one might imagine.
Yes, and just on that, actually, there's also Tonic Housing, who I'm not sure how far they've got actually, but the plan was to develop specific housing for elder LGBT community, which I think is really interesting. And there was a question that came in about, you know, is there specific funding available for minority groups in terms of providing affordable housing? I don't know whether anyone knows whether there is, or whether there's specific co-ops that have that perspective at all.
I mean, I think we're seeing more and more like organization focusing on specific groups, and that's absolutely fine. So I think from our perspective, and I'm sure from the bank as well perspective, we will consider that as well. So I think accessing generalist funding like ours would work well as well.
And Helen, yeah, I was going to come to you.
I think there's certainly been some interesting initiatives, and I'm going to see if I can get the name right. There's been the Resourcing Racial Justice Fund, which is a new fund that's just come out, not specifically about housing, but also a GoFundMe that was about access to land, the Land Spatial Fund. I haven't got the name quite right. It was a campaign that was about the kind of disproportionate access to land. Certainly in Brighton, we've got an interesting event. We've got our AGM next week, and we've got an interesting event as part of that, which is drawing from the experiences of people of colour, Black and minority ethnic groups who have set up and established around the country, kind of looking at that very much as an area in which inequality in terms of access to housing and housing ownership is kind of key. So there's certainly work going on around that, and we're supporting an emerging people of colour group who want to set up a housing co-op in Brighton. So that kind of there's a history in that, and I think it's certainly something that's very very key at the moment and is being discussed at the moment.
Great. 2 more questions, and then I'm going to ask everyone to sort of give their vision for the future. So one person has commented that housing associations are now vetting people and saying people on welfare benefits cannot meet the rent and therefore do not get allocated to a housing association home. So I'm assuming that the projects that we have been talking about today would not necessarily negatively screen people out in the same way. Would that be a fair comment? Yes, lots nodding heads, I think.
I think so. I think it's fair to say when we look at, for example, a housing cooperative coming to us for a new project, that we would normally look for a minimum of 50% of the residential members to be in some form of paid employment. So there are some rules there. We wouldn't necessarily want to set up a housing co-op that was made up purely of people on benefits. And that's a judgment call that we've made, rightly or wrongly. But it is fair to say that restriction exists. I'm
assuming that. Go on.
I was just going to say that I mean, I think it's horses for courses. So I think there are different bits of the housing market that are and different developments need to address that, but they need to know which bit they're developing. I must say, property is really focused on people who are reliant on benefits to pay the rent. So that's fairly clear. But with other hats I've got on around community land trusts and a housing scheme that we've got going through planning at the moment, it's 100% affordable housing scheme. And actually, we've got a tenure that I'm not sure has been done many places, but it's effectively shared ownership, but allows people to buy just 1% of the property, so they can buy without a mortgage, and then they rent the rest of it. And what we've agreed with Cornwall Council is that the rents are both set at a maximum of 80% of open market rents for that particular type of house in that particular area, and they're capped at LHA, so they're both available if families drop below, drop out of the the employment market. But particularly we thought relevant in many other places is that actually if you want to be a homeowner, but your employment is varied, and in Cornwall that's very common. You have high amounts of employment through summer periods, and then really sketchy employment or part-time employment through the winter. Actually having if you're kind of good enough to pay the rent, then but you want to be a homeowner, could you actually have these micro staircasing abilities to increase? And Cornwall Council have their affordable housing team. As long as we gave them 30% of the units as compliant affordable that tick their box, they allowed us to do this innovative thing, which we think is a better fit for the local market. But because it's community-led housing, rather than a registered provider, rather than a housing association, we can set our own allocation policies that are more targeted to what's needed, rather than just being told what to do by sections of the central government. So I'm a great believer in having multiple different definitions of what's affordable in different places, rather than having a single categorical definition of what's affordable generically.
Yeah. Thank you. I did have one other question that I quickly wanted to ask, which was how do communities basically, or ethical property developers, get land released from private speculators and from local authorities? Steve, does that?
I can't answer all of that, but I can say that it's extremely difficult getting it away from not being usurped by private property developers. We've gone with the model generally of using brownfield sites and sites that are difficult to develop. And indeed, the second site, which is part of our share offer, is zoned as employment land. But because we're providing work facilities as well as social enterprise hub, it's classed as a live-work development. So we're getting around that. And obviously a property developer would find that more difficult. Private property developer just wanted to put housing on that side would be resisted by the local planners. Yes. So we have an edge in that. I can't answer the rest. I haven't got an answer.
No, okay. And that did actually just remind me of a question that got sent in, which was, I'm not going to be able to put my finger on right now, but there was a model that was quite interesting to do with putting affordable accommodation over car parks. And there was a scheme being proposed in Bristol, and I think it was originally proposed by someone called Bill Dunster, Z-Pods, which I have not heard of, I must admit. Helen Bartlett's nodding her head. She knows a lot about that. Would you like to comment?
Teams looking to do that, by the way, across the UK, but go ahead.
Sorry, Anne.
No, I don't know lots about them. I've just heard of them. Sorry.
Right.
Lisa, can I just chip in? Maybe of use to say that there are some good examples where local authorities have partnered with community groups on asset transfers that have been in public ownership into community use. You know, it's patchy. There are some councils that are much more switched on than others at doing this. But for more case study information and background to some of the legal documentation that's been used, there is a free site run by community-led homes, which is clhtoolkit.org, and it's well worth taking a look at the resources there.
Perfect. And just to let everyone know, we will capture all of the resources that have been mentioned today, and we'll make sure that all the links are sent out afterwards. Now, I feel as if I'm going to fail for the first time in keeping to time, but if everybody could, just in 2 sentences, literally, just answer the question, how can we create permanently affordable community-owned homes in every UK town, therefore ending UK homelessness? How can we achieve this? You've got 2 sentences each. Is that possible? Why don't we go from the top? Helen Bartlett.
2 sentences. I think we need to support a whole range of options, and we need to look at housing as something that needs initial support in terms of land, favourable land, capital investment, etc. But in the end, pays back dividends and means that you have resources that stay affordable forever. So the investment that is made now comes back in the long term.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, good question. I think there's a lot of opportunity for significant growth, and I think actually perversely with what's happened with COVID and the way that our high streets are going to change, the use of town centres, shops, offices, etc. Let's concentrate more on what we actually have got in terms of the built environment and use it to tackle some of the social housing problems that we've got. It's not all about new build. We're really happy to support ecological new build, but there's an awful lot more that can be done. And I really think that combined with educating people about how finance works in a good way and not providing lots of funding for holiday homes and second homes that cut people out of the local market would go a long way.
Thank you. And Helene?
Yeah, second what has been said, I would add that, yeah, to bet on community-led housing, because you're building affordable homes in perpetuity. They're not social homes that have the right to buy attached to it and then you lose it. It's literally building a stock of affordable homes. They're incredibly resilient groups. I'm always impressed by that. We need to bet more on them. And yeah, extension of the government's community housing fund, I really hope it's going to be part of the spending review.
Steve?
I'll have a stab at two ideas. Engage and motivate the public to invest more and hence care more, and work with the local authorities and the planning conditions to make sure that for example, redundant units in towns are brought back into use and the best use of land, as long as planning requirements are still in existence on local authorities.
Perfect, thank you. Helen?
I think it's a values-driven thing, and I think we need to apply some common sense to it. There is, I'm very influenced by a chap, Dr. Danny Dorling, you know, and he has pointed out there are enough bedrooms in the UK for us all, but it's how that's divided up. So I think when I started this journey, I was looking at the number of pubs that were closing down. I think there's going to be a wealth of opportunity in terms of vacant office premises, not without challenges, but it could be done. And our share offer, when it goes live, is about a 4-bed house becoming a 9-bed home for life. And I think that sort of pragmatism, where in Edinburgh, 7 out of 10 local authority homes that are let to homeless people, it's a supply issue.
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly, Daniel.
I think if you just look at the numbers of housing, the chronic shortage, then big housing associations and developers are the obvious solution that the government goes after. And I think that misses what communities who actually have to look at and live in the houses really want. And I think we have to just keep going at building the confidence in the general public, in investors, in lenders, that community-led housing, even though they are funny little 6 units here and 30 units there, are a really, really valuable part of the solution. And for Must See Property, you know, our 5-year vision is to raise £5 million and get 10 properties, working with four or five different social enterprises, and building on our 10-year track record of paying a fairly modest above inflation return. It's not going to make anyone millions, but it is something that is being able to see out different economic cycles. So I do think there is track record now, and people need to get behind it.
Thank you.
To get there.
Thank you. Just Ben, finally. You're on mute, Ben.
Sorry, that didn't help. It's empowering communities for me, so it's giving them human resources to enable to build, own property in perpetuity and allocate that to meet local housing needs.
Brilliant. Absolutely fascinating discussion, everybody. Thank you so much for your contributions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to talk as much as you would like. I think we could go on and do another one of these. I think there's so much to talk about. Thank you for joining, and yes, I'll send out some more resources. Thank you for joining us, everyone on the panel and at home. Speak to you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.